pleasure of meeting. My name is Marguerite. I'm the president of the chamber, and I'd like to thank you all for being with us this morning. If you were like me and stayed up late to watch the Eagles game, then some of you are probably tired and need some coffee, so thank you again for being here. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Independence Blue Cross and PA American Water, for their support of today's panel. I'd also like to thank the secretary for being with us this morning. What an honor to have her here with us today, and the rest of our panelists who we will introduce shortly. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our board members who are in the room. So if you are a board member, please just give a wave. I think most of you are sitting at this table. And the former Secretary of the Commonwealth, Carol Aschel, thank you so much for being with us this morning. So today's panel is timely. It's been a year since the passage of the bipartisan, very historic bipartisan infrastructure bill from Congress. Both the private and public sector agree that America's infrastructure must be upgraded to support today's needs. So today we brought together a panel that brings both sectors together to discuss infrastructure and transportation and funding to improve our roads, bridges, mass transit, ports, energies, communications. That bill was incredible. It was something we've really never seen here in this country, such an investment in our infrastructure. I know Junie will get into it with our panelists. So with such an all-star packed panelist, I will introduce Junie alum, who is a civil group manager at the Herbert, Rowland, and Grubick HRG for short, in King of Prussia. In addition to managing the civil engineering staff, she's involved with various aspects of water resource projects and technical project reviews. So, Junie, I'll have her take over.
Gary, I guess we'll start with you, or this question applies, I think all of you could probably have some answers for this, and we're just going to want to start with understanding what projects are you aware of in the region, transportation projects that are underway, and any wish list projects that, specifically if you could talk to us about Chester County and this region, that would be great.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I will probably be speaking more from my previous capacity at the Turnpike Commission, unofficially, right?
Please
That's
do.
Okay. But I am very familiar with their capital plan they're having developed for the last 15 years. So actually, it's a lot of good news for the region here, especially for Chester County. In fact, I just, the Secretary was there as well, a recent presentation by the Chief Engineer, Brad Heigl, last week, showed that for the 2023 construction lettings, they're looking at, Turnpike's looking to let about $800 million worth of construction contracts. 50% of that is in what they call District 4, which is the Southeastern PA region, includes Chester County. So that's a huge, huge investment that the Turnpike's making in this area, which is good. Some of the things, and you might have noticed this, the whole corridor, Chester County basically goes from the Morgantown interchange to the Valley Forge interchange, 26 miles there. And that whole corridor has been in design for several years to be lined 6 lanes. And you might have seen one of the first steps of that whole process is replacing all the overhead bridges so they can handle the new wider template, the Turnpike. So you probably have seen a year ago, Milford Road was replaced, Mount Vista 309, Park Road just finished up construction there at 310. There's a couple in construction at 302 there. I think it says at 345, I forget the local road name. So a lot of the bridges are being replaced, and the overhead bridges are being replaced there, which helps the local road movement as well. But that's going to open up the corridor, or the main line for the 6-lane winding that should follow. And one mainline project, one mainline project is currently in design, or currently in construction, is Mount Vista 324 to 326, which is right by the Valley Forge interchange. It's only a 2-mile area there. But it's a very complex project. The staging's complicated there. So the Turnpike's starting to work its way back from Valley Forge with the 6-lane winding. After that's done, they'll do the next 4 miles, which will take it to the SR29 interchange right here, right down the road. They're also letting next year the 312 to 316 total reconstruction, which is basically from Downingtown interchange 4 miles to the east. So they're starting to close in here. It should be, a couple of years, it should be 6 lanes from Downingtown all the way to Valley Forge and beyond. And then they'll work their way to Morgantown. It's one of the most heavily traveled corridors in the Turnpike system in this area. the top 10 for sure. So it's good news. A lot of good projects on the Eastern Turnpike. I can't really speak much from the PennDOT side. I'm not as familiar there, but I know they have a lot more planned. So I think, like I said, it's good news for the county there.
Full disclosure, this is my county. We moved to Chester County back in 1989. And what a difference, right? Great job, Brian, and your predecessor in developing the county and keeping such a balanced county. But a little bit about my background. I went to University of Michigan. Go Blue. I did my engineering work over there, and I started working as a bridge engineer. And I worked on the private side for over 30 years. I worked for a number of different firms. National firms, international firms. I had different roles. I was practicing bridge engineering, then engineering work, then project management, then business development and operational part of the business for multiple engineering companies. Over the years, I dealt with a lot of different clients in Pennsylvania and outside of Pennsylvania in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region. Very familiar with the toll agencies, the transit agencies. I work with Amtrak. I also work with a number of different clients in New York City, MTA, and some of the clients in Massachusetts, different places. So pretty familiar with the background of all the clients. And then this opportunity came about when Leslie Richards was still the secretary. Leo Baggy, who was the executive deputy secretary at the time, decided to retire, and Leslie reached out to me and she asked me if I was interested in the position. Never worked on the public side, and I said, well, Leslie, I've never done it. She said, come on board, you'll figure it out, no problem. Sure, I signed up for it, and then what happened? COVID happened. So it was locked down, and very quickly, you had to figure out, you have to learn about the agency, you have to figure out the business, you have to deal with the challenges during COVID, safety, lack of funding, everything else that we had to do. So that's a little bit of my background from what I've been doing over the past 30-some years of my career. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Graham. I am an engineer currently working with McMahon Associates. I've only been there since January this year. For the previous 34 years, I was at PennDOT for a little bit, but most of my time was spent at the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. And started out there as a bridge engineer, worked my way up to chief bridge engineer, and eventually became the assistant chief engineer for design at the commission for many years. Obviously was able to work in the same industry with the secretary here for many years, which is great. And most recently with her position as the secretary, she's also a commissioner for the Turnpike Commission as well. So it's been a good working relationship there. So anyway, yeah, it's been good. I retired, like I said, last December, and started my new career on the private side here with McMahon Associates.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm Pam McCormick. I work at SEPTA with Leslie Richards and a lot of really wonderful people, and Joe Connolly is here with me from SEPTA today. I'm glad to see so many friends from the Government Affairs Committee here from the Chester County Chamber, and also I'm not new to Chamber of Commerce work. I got to work for the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce for many years, learned a little bit about transportation funding there. So at SEPTA, I work in government affairs, very focused on funding needs for the system and just a lot of other government affairs initiatives that SEPTA is watching, and very interested in what we can do as a Southeast region to help propel our region and the whole state forward. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Phelps. I'm the Executive Director of the Transportation Management Association of Chester County, also known as TMAC. Like Pam, not unfamiliar with chamber work. Many of you know my work at Westchester, Tri-County, Mainline Chamber, all the locations that I've worked in the chamber world. My background is actually social and cultural history with a minor in archaeology, and I actually did that for Montgomery County for 10 years, working in the Department of History and Cultural Arts. And so, actually in my old directory, Brian, you appear in that directory. I relocated to Houston for my wife's job and learned how to have conversations with the business community. I worked for Junior Achievement of Southeast Pennsylvania, or Junior Achievement of Southeast Texas. And there, really learned to have that conversation with business and understanding what business needs are and business incorporation. When I moved back then to the Philadelphia marketplace, that's when my chamber work began. And then I transitioned that 10 years ago into TMAC. Again, having that community conversation about what our transportation needs are at all levels of the county, whether it's for our commuter transportation, our delivery system, what does it mean to move goods and people throughout the county? Thank you.
Thanks, Doc, because I had no idea. I see the work, I didn't know it was that big of a project, like, it's pretty good. Exciting for the Turnpike. But Secretary, do you have anything to, any PennDOT project? You mentioned PennDOT, some of the other type of projects that perhaps, anything that's in our region that's significant, we should.
A lot of significant projects in District 6 area. So as you know, District 6 or DVRPC is the largest MPO in Pennsylvania. 25%, a little over 25% of the spending and the budget goes to this region. You mentioned the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's providing an additional $4 billion over 5 years to the funding of the state. This is on the federal level. So we just completed our 12-year program, the TIP program for 2023. Obviously, in the next 5 years, the plan is to spend about $13.1 billion, which is a large number. And as I mentioned, $4 billion, $1.6 billion of it is purely for the bridge program, and we need to address the bridge projects in Pennsylvania. As you know, we used to have the most number of bridges in poor condition. We managed to reduce it, but we still have a lot of bridges. We have over 3,300 bridges in poor condition right now. Pennsylvania is a large state, as you know. And at PennDOT, the budget that we have, which is about $10 billion, $1 billion of it goes to other agencies and to debt services, but $9 billion is being distributed between highways and transit system. $7.5 billion goes to the highway and bridge program, and $2.5 billion goes to transit system. My friends at SEPTA, they received around $1 billion, which is $600 for their operational expenditures and another $300 some for their capital program, and I'm sure Pam is going to talk about some of the major projects in this area. But the $7.5 billion that we spend on an annual basis really address a lot of the need that we have, and but still, we have a large infrastructure. We are responsible for 130,000 miles of local and state-owned highways. We are responsible for over 40,000 bridges in the state, state-owned and local-owned. So we have a large infrastructure. Now, specifically to Chester County, well, specifically to DVRPC, we're receiving an additional $640 million from the infrastructure bill over 5 years. This year alone, we're going to spend an additional $117 million for this region. District 6 projects, we have 135 projects, active projects equivalent of $2 billion in District 6 area, which is the 5 counties. Chester County, obviously, some of the major projects in Chester County, the biggest one is the Route 30 projects, the 14 miles of Route 30. There are multiple sections, 4 or 5 sections. One is the ITS section, the other 4 is all construction projects. They're in different phases. The first phase will go into construction in 2026, and then others will come later. The other projects that we have in Chester County is 422. 422 crosses Chester and Montgomery. There are multiple major bridges over Schuylkill River on 422, and that's a huge project, over $500 million. And we've been phasing it, we've been spending money and investing into 422, I'd say over 15 years now, from the planning side and now into multiple construction projects. Route 1 in Chester County is another big project, and I think they were supposed to, I believe the district actually led the project in 2022, this past couple months, and it's going to go on for a couple of years. There's a whole bunch of improvements that we're doing on Baltimore Pike. There is additional lanes, there is additional improvements improvements at the interchanges. Basically, it's a lot of safety improvements we're doing, and also roadway reconstruction. There are a whole bunch of bridge projects throughout Chester County. We have no shortage of it, as you know. And so these are some of the noteworthy projects. I also have to say that the district has been investing a lot into 322 project. 322 is a major connector from Chester County to Delaware County to the airport. 95 is a huge access, and they just finished the expansion and the reconstruction of a section of it. The eastern section is going to go into construction in 2026, I believe. So there's a lot of work that goes on in District 6. We're very happy about the additional funds that's being allocated to DVRPC. And part of it, of course, is going to go to reconstruction and making safety improvements, but a lot of it also is going to go into addressing the need, not just by expansion of the roadways and adding more lanes, but managing the congestion, which is really an important effort under this infrastructure bill. This infrastructure bill, one of the guidelines, I mean, there are several guidelines we received from the infrastructure bill. Obviously, we need to first and foremost address the safety on the roadway system. The roadways that we have, the interstate system, the state routes, interstate look-alike, they were built in the 60s, and they were not built for the current traffic and the current volume that we have. So there's a lot of safety issues on the roadways, geometric safety issues, as well as, you know, curvature and so forth that we need to address it. But we also need to look into address the congestion, not just by expanding the number of the lanes, but looking into integrating technology into what we are doing, managing the traffic, reducing the speed, like such as what we are doing on Schuylkill Expressway, and also bringing transit into a mode of transportation. I mean, things have changed drastically, especially since COVID. You know, technology is actually driving, you know, how people want to commute or how we move the goods and everything. And integrating technology into transportation is a big part of what we're doing right now. We're looking into addressing the climate situations and the congestion situations.
That conversation. But right now, you did mention SEPTA, and I thought maybe if you wanted to share some of the projects and anything about what's underway.
Sure, thanks. And so thank you PennDOT, thank you Pennsylvania for investing in transit. With the help of PennDOT supporting both of our operating and capital budgets, SEPTA had a $1.1 billion budget for our capital spending this year, which is really, we've never had anything that high because of the Federal Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. That meant an additional $100 million to our capital budget. And we can count on that for the next 5 years. So $100 million in a $1.1 billion budget, it's a significant number, but it wasn't enough to replace Act 89 funding. So I would say since Steve Angel was running things in Harrisburg and getting Act 89 of 2013 passed, SEPTA has managed to invest $1.5 billion in Pennsylvania companies to advance our capital infrastructure rehabilitation and improvements. So that is something we want to continue doing, and because the legislature this year did preserve Act 89, they gave SEPTA bondable funding. That was another reason that we were able to increase our capital budget by the amount that we were able to. This IIJA bill, it is a 5-year bill, so it allows SEPTA to plan a little bit, so I can talk a little bit about some of the projects that we have going on. But $100 million toward the bottom line, basically, of our capital budget. Where the big bucks are, though, right, is in the competitive capital investment grant programs. And so in order for SEPTA to apply for those funds to advance really major projects like fleet vehicle replacement and King of Prussia rail extension and trolley modernization, we're going to have to apply for these federal grants. And to do that and to be successful and win those grants, we're going to need the help of local and state partners, because matching funds are so critical. You have to show local buy-in, local interest, you have to show local investment too. So that's something that we're going to be very focused on in the next legislative session. So hopefully we'll count on our friends at the Chester County Chamber to help us there. Brian O'Leary's here from the Planning Commission, and SEPTA also works very closely with DVRPC to talk a lot about how we can work together, how important the counties are. SEPTA serves the whole 5 county areas, so we try to work together with all of our county partners. And we have great board members from Chester County, Commissioner Marion Moskowitz and Kevin Johnson. They've served SEPTA for a long time, and I'm really glad to have them around. And then under Leslie Richards' leadership, we really have taken this moment after COVID to look at SEPTA, to look at the whole system, to look at the changes in ridership and the changes in needs of people. So we have projects going on here in Chester County, and Bus Revolution is one that I can talk about. So in Chester County, SEPTA, before COVID, we were serving about 8,000 riders every weekday, either getting on our regional rail line, the Paley-Thorndale line, with many stations that come out here into Chester County. And then we have 9 bus routes that run through Chester County. So taking a moment during COVID to analyze the bus network, it's not something that SEPTA's done. It's been many, many years since they tried to rework and make the network more efficient. So it's something we're gathering feedback. Tomorrow there's a virtual session on the possibility of microtransit and on-demand service in the Great Valley area as a proposal, as a part of the new bus network redesign. And then also next week there's an open house in Westchester at the Borough Building, I believe. And we can get this information to Laura so she can get it out to everyone. But we're trying to get as much feedback as we can to make the bus network more efficient, to help it link into the other modes of transportation like the Market Frankford line and our trolleys, just to make sure it's a more integrated network. So in addition to bus network redesign, we're also reimagining our rail system. So again, we're seeking feedback on that. It's www.septa.planning.org, and you can go and read all about it and provide feedback, because we do want to meet the needs of our riders. Our region is growing. People are going to different locations now, so we want to meet those needs and those demands. Some of the other projects that are going on here too is through the IIJA, some of those funds. There was a lot of accessibility funding there. So at both the Malvern and Exton stations, we'll be able to accelerate those projects to make them both more accessible with high-level platforms at those stations. So that's something that'll improve dwell time, make your ride faster. I guess one of the things that is affecting ridership right now is a perception out there that service is not as high as it once was. And I can tell you that on regional rail, we're at about 79% of pre-COVID service. And on our other modes, we're at about 89% of our pre-COVID levels of service. So service is out there. I can tell you, I take the train from Wayne. Express trains are back. There's more service during the regular rush hours. So just encourage everybody to take the system if you can. Something else that we're working on, I know that Chester County, Montgomery County, and Berks County are working together on the new Schuylkill River Passenger Rail Authority. So it's something, and that would, with the goal of bringing service back to Westchester and Phoenixville and Reading. It's something that SEPTA is participating in those conversations, and hope to help that group find the funding to do a big major project like that. And I guess everyone here, hopefully you read about the new extension of the Media Elwyn line into Wawa. It's bringing service closer to folks in Westchester and that end of Chester County. Lots of parking there. It's a beautiful new station. Lots of service into and out of the city. So consider that if you'd like to take the train into the city and give it a shot. Seeing lots of ridership on our system during these great games that have been happening down in Philadelphia. So definitely, if you're going in for sporting events or any other special events in the city, definitely consider SEPTA as a way to go. Thanks.
Are any initiatives that are ongoing here in the county?
Yeah, so TMAC, we curate content. So we support our partners, SEPTA, the Turnpike, and PennDOT on their projects. And recently we did an update on the Route 1 corridor. The addition to that would be through Marlborough Township, where PennDOT is also going to be facilitating that work between the end of the expressway and the Longwood Bridge. So that will go under construction too. Those additions would be the multimodal aspect of that too. As we look at all these projects, looking at the multimodal side is really important. The key project that TMAC will be working on is we operate 2 fixed bus routes today. One that goes from Oxford into Westchester, and the second one that goes from Parksburg into Coatesville, serving the far reaches of the county. Now, we are working with PennDOT to do a microtransit study on that. You will hear a lot about microtransit and how it is integrated. The reason why microtransit becomes really important, and I use this as one of our communities. So Modena, south of Coatesville, needs about 3, 4, 5 rides a day. It doesn't make sense for us to do a fixed bus route to Modena every hour, on the hour, every day of the week. But microtransit allows us to deviate a bus to go and pick up people in Modena and get them into downtown Coatesville. We know we operate a bus service called the Outfitter, which is a PennDOT project. We work with the city of Coatesville, getting people from the city of Coatesville out to the urban facility in Gap. We had people from Modena trying to get that bus, and they were actually walking into town, Coatesville, in order to catch that bus. That is not a way that we need to be running a system. So microtransit is that bridge to get folks from communities like Modena into a fixed bus route or to a train system that can get them to greater points. So we are doing that current study with PennDOT to look at our system to see if it is feasible to take that into a microtransit side. So that's really important in moving our folks around in our community, our workforce.
Thank you. Is that something that is done elsewhere in Pennsylvania successfully? This microtransit, it's the first time I'm hearing about it.
Yeah, so there are several microtransit operators in and around the Commonwealth.
Okay.
So it is a proven model. We've been tracking this for probably about the last 4 years and looking at how we can make it work. So it's a combination between technology and then also service planning.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff.
Judy, I will be remiss if I don't mention the good work that we're doing with SEPTA and Amtrak and the stations along Keystone Corridor, which is very important to Chester County, and the great work that Leslie and her team is doing. Actually, they're doing at SEPTA. We've been collaborating. So there is a lot of work going on at the stations. And obviously the most important one, Paoli, we completed that project. It's ADA accessible with the elevators, high-level platform. There is other projects going on around the Paoli station. We're going to create an intermodal facility with bus services in and out of the station area. There is going to be a parking garage built. There is a bridge that's going to get replaced, that Valley Road. Moving on further west, there is, as you know, Exton Station got ADA accessible with the platforms and everything, but there's also a project that we're trying to do to purchase a portion of this land from Norfolk Southern to be able to expand the parking at Exton Station because it's not sufficient. Moving further west, there is the Downingtown Station, which is a big program, big project, as you know. It's multi-use, it's industrial, commercial businesses coming into that area. The station is going to be completely revamped and relocated to a different location. 4 elevators will be built in the Downingtown train station, ADA accessible. There is going to be a bridge location at relocation at Downingtown, which opens up the 322 area in Downingtown. And then further west is the Coatesville, which is a project that's very important to Chester County. I know there's been a lot of discussions about Coatesville and extension of the services, SEPTA services into Coatesville. There's been some conversations about maybe Amtrak, the folks in Coatesville can use Amtrak and get subsidized by PennDOT using their transit pass, SEPTA transit pass. So there's a lot of conversations going around that. I think SEPTA is putting a report together, a study on the cost of the improvement to the operations and the infrastructure that's needed to expand the services. Currently, SEPTA cannot expand their services into Coatesville because there is not an interlocking for them to turn around and go back onto east side of the eastbound service. So there is a lot going on along the Keystone Corridor, and I think it requires a lot of funding, obviously, and programming. What we've put together is part of the Northeast Commission, And we're working very closely with Amtrak and SEPTA to make sure that we can implement all these projects over multiple phases and multiple years.
That's great. That's what I was wondering. Was this like a 10-year? Are we envisioning? Is this currently in planning phase?
Yes. So a lot of them are in planning and design. Like Downingtown Station is currently in design, and the station itself is going to go into construction probably by 2028. As I said, a lot needs to happen on the other parts of the project, so we're able to actually relocate the track and do all the engineering work that goes into building the new station.
Yeah.
To build off of that, people in Chester County need to realize that, you know, our Keystone Corridor is one of those major backbones in the community. There are 5 Amtrak stations along the corridor. To think about that, every year when the Amtrak has to go to the Pennsylvania delegation for their funding, you know, what's going to be put out there, is to remind them that we have these 5 stations along the corridor that are used. And they were used heavily pre-COVID. I mean, and it's not just into Center City, Philadelphia. Those are commuters that are going to Philadelphia, and they go on to New York. But there are also folks that are going from Chester County out to Harrisburg on a regular basis. So that corridor is really a key corridor to move people in and around. When we talk about, you know, the corridor and all the things that are happening, then it builds off of 2 other modes. One is that Chester County is in the process of doing their transit planning. So in conjunction with SEPTA and with Amtrak too, is kind of looking at where all our stations are and how do we need to move people around. So that is a key project. It's not an infrastructure project, but it's a planning project that needs to have happen. And then along that in the corridor too is that, you know, Chester County is going through their master plan for their trails. And so we know that, again, with the Chester Valley Trail, the expansion of that west is really important to the county too. Eventually making that connection to the Enola low grade, which will connect us from Philadelphia all the way out to the Harrisburg region. So, I mean, it's a great transportation option. So all this stuff builds on each other when you talk about each of these projects.
This was in the works regardless of the infrastructure. The infrastructure bill just allows you, can you elaborate a little bit on which of these type of projects the infrastructure bill actually allows you to fund? I'm imagining this one wouldn't be covered with funding from the infrastructure bill.
So, but it allows it. So it doesn't. It's not in the infrastructure bill itself, but then it's the reallocation that there are other projects that can be done with that infrastructure money that doesn't have to be spent on rail or on other, you know, trail projects. That's, you know, it's kind of a trade-off of the funding mechanisms that happen. So we were able to broaden that use of money in other locations. You know, and it is, you know, that significant portion of being competitive.
Yeah, and you all mentioned the infrastructure bill quite a bit, actually, which is great. It sounds like it's helping us and it's doing exactly what we need for the region. Now, do we have a timeline on like some of these things, like how, when, I don't want to dive too deep, I have a couple of other questions and I'm looking at the time, but when we use, just for us to understand the IIJA, like how does it need to be used for transportation? Like does it need to be, when do these projects need to be completed, or things that would be useful for some of us who are
So we have a very robust process in place for our planning at PennDOT. As I mentioned, you know, we just developed our 12-year transportation improvement plan, working with all the MPOs throughout the state. Yeah, and it gets updated every 4 years, obviously, every 2 years and every 4 years again. This new funding that came from infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, $4 billion of it is through formula. So we know we're getting $4 billion. It's going in towards our projects. The projects that we have, we identified in the past, we either expanded on the scope of the project or accelerated. So that $4 billion is actually going to help us to accelerate and expand on the scope of the project. New projects were added to our TIP. That's another way. In addition to the $4 billion, so if you've been following the bipartisan infrastructure law, $1.3 trillion over 5 years, $550 billion of it is formula. The rest is grants. They call it discretionary grants. And by the way, I forgot to mention that The rail and transit are receiving an additional 30 to 40% above and beyond what they used to receive from the infrastructure bill. Amtrak, for example, is getting an additional $66 billion over 5 years. That's huge for the expansion, for state of good repairs and everything. But going back to the additional $500 billion that's coming to the states through discretionary grants, all different kinds of grants. Part of it is actually going to be going towards ports, towards rail systems, towards transit system. Pam mentioned that there's an opportunity to position themselves for some of these grants opportunities that's coming out of the infrastructure bill. And again, grants, no guarantee, it's very competitive. They've identified the criteria on how to evaluate all the grants. Obviously, you need to address safety, number one. Jobs is another, building communities is another, equity is a big part of it, climate and resiliency is a big part of it. These are all the criteria that are being used to evaluate the grant application, and they do it for every project, every grant that we put in. So there's a lot of opportunities, and it's coming out, slowly but surely they're coming out, all these, what they call it, notice of funding opportunities, NOFOs. Anything you want to add?
So we just received a low-no grant to help with, so we're looking at zero-emission bus plan to improve sustainability and the climate, and so we're looking at either battery electric buses, hydrogen fuel cell buses, whatever is going to work best for SEPTA. But we did receive a grant through IIJA to begin looking at where we're going to fuel, no matter what the fuel is going to be. We're still going to need locations to fuel and recharge our vehicles, so we're using some of the funding for that. As Secretary Gramian said, SEPTA is looking at New Starts program under the IIJA bill, and there's some handouts on your table, but talking about SEPTA's projects of significance. So fleet vehicle replacements is just a huge part of our state of good repair backlog. That's $4.6 billion. Half of that is vehicles that must be replaced across the system, not just Market Frankfurt cars or just regional rail cars, but our trolleys. All of our vehicles are near the end of their useful life. So we've got to move forward on that. We'll be applying for grant opportunities to help us fund some of that. King of Prussia Rail, that project is currently at 30% design. We'd like to advance that further. So we'll be applying for the federal New Starts program. Again, a competitive grant program, and we're focusing on all those areas that the Secretary mentioned, equity and jobs, and I guess there's another handout on your table too, and I guess for the benefit of chamber members who are here, SEPTA, like PennDOT, I believe, we're trying to do more business with small businesses and businesses who are historically underutilized. So we're trying to do all we can with all the funding, the new funding especially that we're getting through IIJA. We're trying to set aside some of that funding to spend it with small businesses. And I think SEPTA's done a great job over the years of investing in Pennsylvania businesses too. And I guess from a political standpoint, I'll just say that that is one of the factors that really assists SEPTA when we're trying to talk to legislators outside our service area. And that's when we say to them, you might not have a SEPTA bus driving through your legislative district, but we just bought widgets or got services from these small businesses in your district. And that really, it goes a long way. And we've made some really great friends across the Commonwealth through that. So I guess our trolley modernization, that's another program. People love SEPTA trolleys. I don't know if you have friends who ride the trolleys, but our trolleys carry as many people as our regional rail system does. People love the trolleys, so our trolleys are not ADA accessible. So that's one thing that's making replacement of those vehicles and just that entire project so expensive, is because they've all got to become ADA accessible, which I think will be great for communities where they're located. So that's another one where we'll be applying for some of the federal IIJA funds to help with that project too.
Gary, we'll shift gears a little bit. We were talking about electric vehicles. You brought it into, and it's something that's very important as well. I mean, when we think about the future, I can't imagine. I know that right now we're starting to see uptick in electric vehicles on the road. Industry analysts project that electrical vehicles will comprise 10% of the fleet by 2030. The vehicles are currently using the transportation system for free. And when I say that, I likely know about this, is like there's a gas tax apparently, so those vehicles that run on gas are paying their share, and however the electric vehicles on the opposite side currently are using the highway for free, and that's the conversation out there. But the projection to 2020, like I said, by 2030 is that there's going to be an increase of 10% of these vehicles. What is happening that you're aware of with the Turnpike Commission and things like that, like from your previous job, and also later, I'm curious about how the transition. Now you're on the other side, like and how the IAJA, like how you look at these projects now from both perspectives, in the future.
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I've had an electric vehicle ordered for about 1.5 years now. I haven't gotten it yet. So far about that. Who has an electric vehicle on the fire? Anybody? Yeah, but they are coming, you're right. So that's something we have to plan for. And again, we were at the Turnpike. Turnpike was, knowing that's the case, with the Turnpike, of course, we got our revenue through the tolls, so that the gas tax wasn't as big a deal for us.
Yeah, good for you.
But it is a huge deal, and the Secretary can definitely speak better to this than I can. But I think everyone knows the gas tax funding is a failing system for the region, for the state. I think I've seen it again when the Deputy Secretary say that 87% of the transportation funding comes from the gas tax. That's crazy, compared to other states in New York. I think it's down to 17%. They get it from other sources. Relying on the gas tax just isn't sustainable going in the future. Again, the Secretary could probably speak better than that. But yeah, the Turnpike, they're definitely coming. Some of the considerations, I guess, that we were looking at least when I was at the Turnpike. There's wear and tear on the road. There are heavy vehicles, batteries. There's legislation that's passed to allow heavier truckloads now, the electric truckloads to travel. So that was a consideration. But I don't probably have much more to add. John, Secretary.
Yeah, I'll be happy to add some more to what Gary said. So first of all, we had 10,000 electric vehicles back in 2019. We're up to 30,000 now, and this is just EVs. We're not counting the hybrid cars. We traditionally lose around $10 to $15 million a year because of not just because of the electric vehicles and the hybrid cars, because the cars are becoming more fuel efficient, because there is a change in the habit of driving. People are working from home, less traffic, less cars on the road, less use of gas, and as you mentioned, as Gary mentioned, 78% of our revenue comes from gas tax, and we've been losing about 10 to 15 million. Gas tax is not a sustainable source of funding, as you mentioned. A lot of these auto manufacturing, they're getting away from making combustible engine cars by 2030, 2050. Some of them are completely eliminating combustible engine vehicles, and they're going all electric vehicles. California passed the law by 2035. They're not going to be selling any cars but electric vehicles. So the states are getting on board. As you know, climate crisis is a real crisis we have. We cannot deny it. We have the roadway system that were built in the 40s, 50s, 60s were not built for the current climate situation. Those of you who are in Chester County, when we had the Hurricane Ida last year, it was devastating in the downtown area. It was really bad. So we really need to get on board with addressing the climate situation. And obviously, electric vehicle is one way of doing it, and reducing, as you know, transportation is the second highest, or some states are the highest generator of greenhouse gas. So we need to do something about it. And it's great that we're introducing these electric vehicles. That's the trend for the future. When are we going to get there? Honestly, I don't think any sooner than 2050 if I have to guess. But we need to start sometimes, at some point. This infrastructure bill actually is providing a great amount of money, 2.5 billion for the electric vehicle infrastructure system throughout the states, the United States. Pennsylvania is receiving 171 million to build our infrastructure along the major corridors. These are the interstate systems that we have. This is the phase 1 of the EV infrastructure that we need to build over the next 5 years. This year alone, we're getting 25 million under the IIJA, which we have to, we've identified the corridors, we've identified the procurement process. We're going to start rolling out the procurement and build the NEVI charging stations on some of these corridors that we have identified. Again, as I mentioned, is all the interstates throughout the state, plus some 422 is among the list, some of the non-interstate roadway as well. 15 is another one. But going back to what you just mentioned is we are shifting to that direction. We have a long way to go. We have, the money that's coming through the state through IIJA, obviously. We need to put the plans together, which we did. We got the approval and we got the funding, and we're going to start building it. It's a big collaboration with the private side. We're working with the electric companies, with the utility companies. PUC is part of it. There is a big workforce development that's part of it. And we want to make sure that as we're building these charging stations, that it also provides opportunity for folks with the trade schools, that they know how to fix it, how to build it, and they're part of the solution, obviously. So this is all new to us, and we're moving forward with the phase 1.
PennDOT released their electric vehicle mobility plan. So that was released, which identifies several corridors here in Chester County, Route 1 as being one of them. Last week at this time, we were hosting a forum in this room talking about that EV infrastructure that needs to come. We will be, right now, we are 8%, in the national market, 8% of electric vehicles between light-duty trucks and vehicles. So that 10% will not be 2030. It'll be much sooner than that piece. We need to figure out how to get the infrastructure in place. This is really an area for business and government to come together to build out a public-private sector infrastructure. We should not be able to mandate electric charging stations on new projects. Businesses should be looking at adding them as an amenity into that. And so EV really is, it's here and it's going to stay, and there are more electric vehicles coming out every day, and soon you'll get yours, Gary.
Stations. The Turnpike has a program to construct and has already constructed several charging stations along the Turnpike at strategic locations. One being Peter J. Camille's in the is a targeted location. Whether it's in there or not yet, I'm not sure, but that's part of the process plan there too.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Two questions, one macro, one micro. The micro is, do we have any time frame for the construction of the bridge in Paoli Station? Some of us have been working on that for 30 years, and it's like, wow, is it really going to happen before I die? And the more macro is the build-up of the infrastructure for the charging of vehicles is one thing, but are you guys involved, is the transportation industry involved in planning upstream with respect to the grid and the actual ability to provide electricity downstream to the charging station? So micro, macro, however you want to go.
So macro, let's talk about that. The grid system is, as you know, we're collaborating with the Department of Energy. They created a joint agencies, Transportation and Department of Energy, and this is at the national level, at the federal level, and there is a director for that joint office that has to overlook. You're absolutely right. That goes to the Department of Energy on how they want to expand the grid system. Obviously, there is an interest and there is some opportunities on grants and funding to look into alternative way of producing electricity. Whether we are there or not, no, we're not. I know Turnpike, they're actually looking into the solar system and they're putting solar panels. They actually brought in this company that evaluated the entire length of turnpike to identify the areas where it's going to be a good receiver of solar energy. And they're going to put together a high-level plan for turnpike on where these areas are, what the cost of it is. And obviously, it starts with a plan. If there's going to be an interest, then the private sector comes in and puts in all these solar panels to generate more electricity. So there are these big programs in terms of the macro level, as you just mentioned. You're right. It is a big concern whether there is enough of it or not. Pennsylvania, we don't have that shortage, obviously, but you go to some of the states like California, Arizona, there is a big concern over there. You talked about the bridge, Paoli Station Bridge. It's under design. You're absolutely right. I think it's going to go into construction in 2023 or 2024. I can look up the date and let you know.
Thank you.
I would just add, I'm way out of my government affairs lane here, but I know so much of what SEPTA does is focused on resiliency and redundancy. And so we're always trying to make sure if something goes down, we can shift over to some other fuel that can power our electric trains and can just provide other power so that we're not putting too much pressure on the grid. And when it's a very hot day, we can switch over to give PECO more options to help residents. So I know that's a big part of what we are planning and the work that we
If
do.
we really achieve our goals with respect to electric vehicles, you're getting a whole mess of energy demand from a grid that's not making it now, so
Right.
it's scary.
And PECO is in the process of addressing those issues too. And there's also the other side. Here in Pennsylvania, we need to be planning for how that grid system is. We do still have a way to get to that need of that grid system for electric vehicle charging stations. It's also looking at the types of batteries because the technology itself for charging will change. And again, the usage of those batteries will change. So then the question is, how much energy do we need from the grid for those batteries too? And time of day use and all that, all the other pieces that go into play.
About what SEPTA is doing to improve safety, cleanliness, and security on the system. I know it's a concern to everybody, but we are spending almost double what we used to spend on safety and security on the system right now. So I hope if you do decide to take the train that you'll see police officers. Maybe you won't because they're undercover police officers, but we're also hiring ambassadors and social outreach specialists to help us with some of the vulnerable population who are finding their way onto the system. Our ridership is up almost to 60% of pre-COVID levels, which we're so proud of that. October, we hit a high mark of 616,000 riders, I think. So that is a significant number of people who are on the system every day. Just encourage you to give it a chance. SEPTA Key cards are available. You can use your credit card to pay to ride the train now.
Most of you are facing in the workforce today, and it generates revenue for our businesses in addition to creating those jobs. And at the Chamber, we're honored to work with our public and our private partnerships. We've written many letters of support this year for projects, and I'd like to continue to do that. If there is grant money that you or your company is looking for, or any sort of level of support, letter of support that we could write, happy to do so. I know we wrote one for the Economic Development Council, we wrote one for TIP money, so really want to expand the advocacy that the Chamber brings to the table. And again, just would like to thank our panelists for being here. Give them another round of applause.